Welcome to this presentation, which is called The Impact of Trauma on Health Outcomes and Wellness. And this is by Dr. Hasshan. And I'd like to begin by saying that this program is sponsored by the Moravian College In Focus program. In Focus is actually an innovative program to promote in-depth examination of complex issues from multidisciplinary perspectives. Through In Focus, the members of the Moravian College community engage in analysis and activism regarding important challenges facing human beings in the world in the 21st century. So our current theme for this year is health and healthcare. And I'd like to, at this point, introduce the other people that are on the In Focus team for health and healthcare. Standing in the back is my co-director, Sabrina Teresi, Dr. Sabrina Teresi, and she and I are working closely with planning and organizing. And I'd also like to introduce Emily Graber, who's also in the back, and Emily is working with us on also getting these programs organized, updated, ready to go. So thanks to both of them. And we do find that Dr. Bott's presentation is particularly appropriate for healthcare and health, so we are very pleased to have him here today. I will give a little bit of background on him in terms of letting everyone know his credentials and so forth. He is the Director of Operations for the Promise Neighborhoods of the Lehigh Valley. He's also Director of Education and Training for Practitioners Research and Scholarship Institute. And he is a leading expert in trauma-informed care, resiliency, restorative practices, re-entry, and community engagement.
My daughter wrote that. Just
beautiful. Dr. Hasshan Batts holds a joint master's degree in social work from North Carolina A&T University and the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and a doctorate in health sciences with a concentration in global health from Nova Southeastern University in Florida. So at this point, I'll turn it over to you. Welcome. Thank you.
I don't speak that loud, so is that too loud? Is that good? All right. Thank you guys for coming, especially today, because it is so beautiful out. So I know that this was either very meaningful to you or you were required to be here. But I really appreciate you guys. And this topic is dear to my heart. And it's the perfect timing, and I appreciate the school really focusing on it. This all started because we had an intern, Ashley. You want to raise your hand, Ashley? Who worked with us through the Bridging the Gap program. And I mention that because she's a nursing student that was working with us, and we covered a lot of trauma-informed care, and she realized through her clinicals how it's so beneficial to her. And this is something we really don't talk about in healthcare. So the title's a little misleading. The Impact of Trauma on Health Outcomes and Wellness. And the reason it's misleading is because typically we do this with kind of one population. It'll be like with physicians, or with healthcare providers, or educators, or therapists, or community folks. In this room, we have everybody bunched together, so which is beautiful. So we're going to talk a little bit about, from an institutional level, but also we're going to talk about the personal impact, individual impact that trauma has on us, and kind of some of the things that go with the brain and behavior, right? So, and this is perfect for today. So, those of you guys that have worked with me know that I say, I could be the president of Visco, but this is the work that I choose to do. And we center to really think about all the places you can be. You've chosen to do this work and to work with the populations that you've chosen to work with for a reason. Some of us are wounded healers. Others just feel compelled to give. How many RNs do we have in the room? Because I know we give out nursing credit. So my first love is a nurse. My mother's a nurse. I have to say I'm partial to RNs. How many therapists do we have? Social workers, counselors? Okay, we got a few. I'm a therapist by training, so we're making those connections, and educators. So we choose the population that we work with, and we choose this field for a reason. There's so many other things that we could do. We could be making more money. We could be having big vacations, but we choose this work. And this is a journey that we're going to go on today. We're getting there. Be patient with me. But so in doing this work, I found people like to count and measure. I was taught that I have to have measurable objectives in order for the workshop to really be powerful. I I'm not a measurable objective kind of guy, so these are my measurable objectives. This is what we're going to cover today. Three objectives we're going to cover. One is we're going to talk about healing occurs in relationships within the context of community. So it's really a little touchy-feely, but there's some science behind it too. So we're talking about healing relationships. That's where healing happens. And this is this Ubuntu principle. This is I am because we are, therefore because we are, I am. I am because we are, therefore because we are, I am. Now, indigenous culture will say sickness also happens in relationships. So we're looking for harmony. And when things are out of whack, that's when the sickness occurs. The other thing is everyone has a story. Now, usually this slide will say something like every patient has a story, or it'll say like every student has a story, or it'll say like every client has a story. But because we have a mixed group, we want to talk about everyone has a story. And what does that mean? That means when someone shows up in front of us, they have 40, 50 years of experiences that have contributed to who they are and how they got there. And then the caveat is, every provider also has a story. So again, how do we end up where we're at? Why do we do this work? You know, when we think about, for you guys that work in schools, when something happens at 1 o'clock, we don't know what's happening, you know, at the beginning of the day, what the students have experienced, what the patient has experienced. So we're really going to talk about the impact of trauma. And then the last one, you can't fix what ain't broke. And this comes from one of my mentors who would always emphasize to me, she would say, you are perfect, whole, and complete. Now I've been told you go through 3 phases in your life. They say the first phase is, and I'm sharing this because I'm starting to quote myself. So I say you fix things people need to heal. The first phase, they said, is when you believe in Santa Claus. They said the second phase is when you become Santa Claus. And the third phase is when you begin to look like Santa Claus. This is what I've been told. So since I'm getting towards that third phase of my life, I said I can quote myself now. And the objective here is, the learning objective is to talk about that we can't fix what ain't broke, that people are perfect, whole, and complete. That they've had experiences that have impacted their decision making and outcomes. All right. So we're going to start here. And it seems like I'm just talking to nurses, but we're talking to everyone that are in helping relationships, because we have such an opportunity to impact people's lives. So the Gallup poll was done, and it found that nursing is the most trusted profession, I think is what it says. Top of the list for every year other than what? 9/11 when firefighters won. Like, this is powerful. So every time a patient walks into the room, we have an opportunity. Every single interaction with a patient, we have an opportunity to have a healing relationship with them. And those are the things we're going to talk about. What is trauma? What comes to mind when you think of trauma? Injuries?
Sexual abuse.
Sexual abuse?
Emotional harm.
Emotional harm? Anything else?
Experience that's long lasting.
Experience that's long lasting, thank you. So, sometimes we'll ask this question and you'll just hear about the physical traumas, like, especially when we're working with physicians, you'll hear things like car accidents, gunshot wounds, things like that. What we're talking about some of the things that you guys named. Lifelong experiences that people have. And the caveat here is it's not only that had, but that people have witnessed. So we're going to talk about many different types of traumas. So it's also things that people have witnessed. We're also going to talk about traumas that we all are at risk for and how to protect ourselves. Now you can't look forward in the slides because that's kind of like my surprise. So. Any questions about that? So we have identified 6 realms of trauma. Now, none of this information is going to be new to you. That I can guarantee you. We're just going to give you some language to support what you already know, and a couple continuing education credits. So, I want you to think about specific patients and families as we go through some of these slides, or even your own experiences for our community folks. Think about your own experiences. So these are the 6 realms that we're going to discuss today. Individual trauma, the primary trauma is one that we usually talk about the most, physical violence, sexual assault, neglect, childhood abuse, and we're going to go through the ACE study also, so adverse childhood experience. This is one we encounter the most. We'll break down a couple. What stands out to you guys when you look at this slide? Anything new?
The vicarious.
Vicarious trauma, we'll spend a lot of time talking about that. So that's the stories that we hear over and over and over again, and how they impact us. So even watching the news sometimes, you know, watching some of those videos, the impact that they can have. So sometimes you'll find yourself, I used to work at a children's home in North Carolina. I was probably like 24, 25 years old. And that's why I learned to cry. So I'm a black male. Black males don't cry. I don't know if you guys know that. Males really don't cry. Black males definitely don't cry. But I realized that it was okay to cry, but I didn't know why. I would just be driving home and crying. And it was because of that vicarious and secondary trauma. So we'll talk about how that impacts us and ways that we can protect ourselves. Anything else stand out to anyone? I know there's like this rule, you're only supposed to put 4 things on a slide. There's probably 40 things on here.
A number of people deny the collective consciousness or the cellular memory of slavery, colonialism, the Holocaust. You know, as a person of color, even though I may not have personally experienced slavery, I still find it painful to deal with, to confront and discuss and talk about.
Okay, thank you. We're going to talk about that one too. This is one of the most controversial ones up here. We'll talk about that. All right, anything else about? Any questions on these two? So.
No, I don't see war. Where do you put war?
Where would you put it?
The question, I mean, it's not historical, it's even current.
Yeah, that's right. So it can be individual,
Yeah.
because something can happen to you during the war. And so one of the groups that we work with in our area are refugee populations, and we do a lot of this work to talk about the experiences and how the trauma has impacted refugee populations. So it can be individual, something that's happened to you. It can be community, like communal. Vicarious, just working within the healthcare setting. Family, of course, the disruption of the family and the resettlement camps, and then it's going to be historical.
Yeah.
It's going to be intergenerational. I mean, some of the things that are happening right now, we'll see the impact of them 50 years from now. So I'd put it probably in almost all of them. Okay, so with the definition, one of the things we want to talk about is that trauma is something that happens on the inside. So you'll look at the research, and there'll be identical twins that are raised in the same home and have had the same experience, but for some reason it impacts one different than it impacts the other. So it's not necessarily the experience of war that we're talking about. It's not necessarily the experience of homelessness that we're talking about. We're talking about the impact that it has on the individual. This is something that really shakes your well-being and has lifelong impact, as you talked about. But if we can't just go down a checklist and say, this has happened, you're going to be traumatized. You know, so there are risk factors and also protective factors, but it's really individualized. There I go quoting myself again. All right. Just to talk about a couple of the ones that were on there. So the broken windows theory, that's one of the ones people always have questions about. It was under community trauma. This is this theory that if you live in dilapidated communities, it has an impact on your life outcome. It has an impact. It's traumatic to wake up every day, see broken windows. So this is, anyone from New York City here? New York City. Tell us how they cleaned up New York. New York was one of the most dangerous places in the world, and Mayor Giuliani, do you remember how they cleaned it up?
Oh, yeah. With the cops.
With the cops. They used the broken windows theory. They used the criminal justice system to clean it up. But what they did was not necessarily the typical approach. The commissioner had this approach of, if we can attack quality of life crimes, it will prevent real crimes, so to speak. So if someone graffitied on the wall, they'd come around and they'd paint it the same day. If they served with open beer container, they'd arrest you. Jumping a turnstile, they'd arrest you. What does this mean? If you live in a community where there's small acts of vandalism, it leads to much larger crimes, like murders. This was the theory. So New York became the safest place to live because I'm not going to say the approach they use was the best. They lock a lot of people up for small crimes, and ultimately they say it improves crime. So that's the broken windows theory. That was one of the ones on the list, and I just want to go into that a little bit. And then also this one, so this is talking about community trauma. Living in violent neighborhoods, the research shows that the children in violent neighborhoods have higher cortisol levels. So when we think about the students that we work with, or even within our healthcare settings, people's lives are like, they have like this compounded trauma that they're living with every day, and it impacts their decision making, it impacts their life outcomes, it impacts several things, and it's measurable. Historical trauma, here's the one you brought up. So this is from Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart. We're going to talk a little bit about her work. The background on historical trauma, it started with children of Holocaust survivors. Is anyone familiar with historical trauma? Yeah. Okay, so started with children of Holocaust survivors. What they looked at is why did children of Holocaust survivors demonstrate the same trauma symptomology and they didn't experience the Holocaust? They had the hypervigilance, they had some of the physical attributes, and what they found was that the maladaptive behaviors and experiences were being passed down from generation to generation by the parents who had experienced it. So here you have a child that was born into safety, and they demonstrated the same trauma symptomology, some of the things that we'll talk about, trauma responses as their parents. Any questions on that?
Any idea why that is?
We're going to talk a little bit about that. Some of it's parenting. That's the most acceptable reason. Some of it's parenting. So this is next generation. The parents, again, had the hypervigilance. The parents had the, say, certain types of anxiety and things like that. So they're saying that we're passing that down to the parenting skills to the children. There's some other reasons that we're going to talk about, some neuroscience and things like that, that later on have come out. So Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, she said, if this has occurred with Holocaust survivors, maybe this is what's going on with my people. And she talked about the Lakota. So she started to do some research, and she talked about the impact that the Indian schools had on the Lakota. Hers was Lakota specific, and the research has since grown. This is like a new body of research. So this is Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where the war colleges used to be one of the Indian schools, and she uncovered that over 94% of the children that were at the schools were sexually abused. So that's not even talking about having their name changed, not being able to practice their religion, not being able to have any of the Indian culture, just the physical and sexual abuse that occurred, she talks about. All right, so I'm gonna try to work this technology now. Just I'm supposed to end the show, and they use 3 fingers, he said. We got it. You guys are so patient.
Almost mad all the time. Problem. Almost mad all the time. Problems controlling my anger. Can't really think of just one time. I know most of my anger comes from pain. Someone once told me the reason I have so much anger is from my dad, and it comes from my grandpa, which comes from his mom. That the anger is pain from so long ago. She says Indians are so full of pain, causes them to drink it all away, but instead it causes more pain. I have anger from pain. I have many generations of built up pain. I hope that I can learn to forgive and heal, so I no longer carry the pain of my ancestors. I will forgive. I will heal.
1.5% of the U.S. population is Native American. Historical events such as removal from homelands, sexual abuse, exposure to violence, boarding schools, massacres, forced relocation, homicide, suicide, and multiple victimization are ways in which trauma has affected Native communities. 40% of Native Americans live below the poverty line. 39% have some form of a disability. Native children have 2.5 times greater risk of experiencing a trauma, and 30% have some form of depression, while 10% have PTSD. The suicide rate is 3 times higher for Native Americans. Native American women are 2.5 times more likely to be raped or sexually assaulted than women in the U.S. in general. Native Americans are 2.2 times more likely to have diagnosed diabetes.
almost mad all the time. Problems, control.
What are some reactions to that? Okay, so are we saying there's no individual accountability for decision making? Not at all. We're saying there are factors that have occurred that are contributing to people's lives and health outcomes. What are your thoughts? You don't have to raise your hand.
Well, one thing is, of course, it's very sad, and it seems that this is something that there's very little awareness about. There's not very little talked about, and just very little, it seems very few people know about it.
That's right.
Or want to know about it.
Or want to know about it.
Yeah.
Or want to know what you said? Yeah. So we hear about the health outcomes on reservations and in indigenous communities, but we never do like this root cause analysis and start to go back and look at what are some of the factors that have occurred in people's lives and the intergenerational trauma that has occurred. And again, we're not talking about absolving people from responsibility for individual decision makers, but as we work with our patients and our students, we want to understand. So we don't have an indigenous population here in Pennsylvania. However, we do have, even right now, if you think about, so the Allentown school students had how many children that have come over from Puerto Rico after the hurricane? That's going to have an impact on families for some time. You know, like I said, some of the refugee groups that we're working with, the war that you're referring to, it's going to have an impact on people. So we need to understand how it, in Washington State, they use a model called the NEAR model to address trauma. It's called neuroscience, epigenetics, adverse childhood experiences, and resilience. And so they used to do these studies on rat pups. Just what they call little rats. So I'm from Brooklyn, so we know about rats in Brooklyn. They're like the size of cats, right?
They are.
These are not the little laboratory rats that you're accustomed to. These are special rats. But so the rat would have these cute little puppies, and they would squeeze the pups, and then they would measure like the cortisol levels and see that they had changed because of the trauma that the pups experienced. And then they would measure them later as they got older and see that they still had changed. So when they become full-blown rats, their minds and their bodies were different because of the trauma that they experienced. Then they went even further, and they started to measure the bodies of the pups, and they realized, wow, the abuse that we were putting these rats through is multi-generational, it's intergenerational. So the pain that people feel today, science is showing that it impacts the brain and the body of their grandchildren. That's where this work of historical trauma comes from. So this is Maria Yellowhurst Braveheart. Then you have Joy DeGruy, and you touched on this a little bit. Dr. Joy DeGruy out of Portland. She said if this is what happened with Holocaust survivors, and this happened with indigenous communities, this is part of what my people are struggling with, and she developed a theory called post-traumatic slave syndrome. I know some of these pictures are graphic, and there are children here. I guess all the children are mine. They didn't hide them from the children years ago either. So we're going to talk a lot about adverse childhood experience. You guys have any questions on historical trauma? We just wanted to spend some time there because that's probably the newest information. We're going to talk about adverse childhood experiences. This is the pyramid that you'll see traditionally. This is the one that we like to use because it looks at the historical and the local context. So what is going on in Chicago and how that's impacting the school system. What's going on in Nazareth and how that's impacting the school system or the healthcare system. We always want to think about the local conditions that are occurring. Like if you're teaching in Chicago schools right now, I think like 700 people have been murdered, it's going to have an impact on the environment. Organizational trauma. This was a slide on workplace bullying that caught my interest. It's in Australia. So they really have a push to really address organizational trauma, workplace bullying. We don't really talk about that too much. But we will today. Who's heard the saying, nurses eat their young? So you guys smiling. Can you say a little bit about it? Nurses eat their young. So we talk about organizational trauma, because there's all these different types of trauma that we never talk about. What does that mean, nurses eat their young? And she's from Jim Thorpe High School. We went to high school together.
No, just the bullying, shooting off questions and expecting someone that's novice to know the same amount of knowledge that you know from over years of training, and experience. And making it difficult that you feel like you can't ask questions, and kind of need to hold your own.
That's right. So people challenge that. They say, what? They say this organizational trauma is not real. Yes, ma'am.
I also find that many go into nursing because you thought it was a profession of compassion, and many times I'm very blessed in my workplace in that I work with the most amazing people, but my history has been I've met some of the most not nice people ever, like ever,
That's right.
in the nursing profession.
And this is not just nursing. This is not to pick on nurses.
Right.
Because we see the same thing in all of healthcare, and all of education, and all of criminal justice. So when I ask that question of all the places you could be, why do you choose to be here with us? We choose these professions, and again, oftentimes because we're wounded healers, and we don't do our healing. Oftentimes we don't want to talk about the trauma that we've experienced and what we bring into the room. So, and many workplaces don't provide a safe space for that. Because we're taught, we have this professional, I'm a social worker, we have the code of ethics, and the code of ethics says, and not in these words, but leave your baggage at home. Come to work, forget everything you're going through. So what we try to create is these environments where if your mom has leukemia, you can come to work and talk about that. Because it's going to impact your work. So we want to talk about what's in your bag, what's at the table. If you're going through a divorce, you best believe if you're going through a divorce, it's going to impact your interactions with students and patients. So we have to have these restorative environments that we can address that. And that's what they're talking about in Australia. So they're really highlighting some of the things that are happening. So again, today during this workshop, we want to look at our individual experiences and also the power that we have within institutions. So we're going to talk about a few things like that and within teams that we can use. So this is that vicarious trauma. That secondary vicarious trauma. How do we protect ourselves? We send you out into the world, into the field. So Ashley's going to graduate May? In May. We're going to tell Ashley, congratulations, right? And after that, go out and save the world. And she's going to go from patient to patient to patient, or she's a school nurse, from student to student, or community health nurse. And people are going to continue to share their experiences, and we're going to ask you to care. To go out and give, and go out and care, and every day show up. And it was explained to me, it's like, when I meet Ashley, she comes to my home, or she comes into my room, it's like I have this monkey. And I give her the monkey. The monkey's so good, and I give it to her to release this burden. And when she leaves with this monkey, that monkey has to be fed, it has to be changed, it has to be groomed, and it somehow becomes a burden for her. It somehow becomes a burden for her. It can, if she doesn't have a healthy support system and ways to manage it. So that's where the compassion fatigue comes in, the burnout, the secondary vicarious trauma, how we begin to feel the pain of our patients. So what's the question? How do we protect ourselves from the trauma and suffering we support others in healing from? How do we do that? What are some specific ways that work for you guys?
Laughter.
Laughter, here you go. That's right.
Comic relief.
Meditation.
Meditation. These are intentional things that you do. So by the end of this workshop, we're going to all have identified individual things that we're going to commit to. Laughter, meditation. What are some other things that you currently do that work, that get you through this?
Building a support system.
Building a support system.
Music, exercise.
Music.
Exercise.
Exercise. So they're physical things and mental things, yes ma'am?
I go out to breakfast with my nurses friends real early in the morning, once a week. We kvetch.
You,
Kvetch.
I'm not sure.
It's a Yiddish term where you just get it out of your belly. You just
Okay, vent. Kvetch.
Yeah.
Kvetch. So you learn something every day. We kvetch. Yeah. So the foundation of everything we do is that healing occurs in relationships. That's what I really believe. So those are healing relationships that you guys are talking about establishing. Kvetch. Yeah. All right. So we have to have ways to protect ourselves from that vicarious trauma. So we've talked about the 6 realms. Now let's talk about what are some of the common responses. So I do some work with some state groups around reentry and incarceration and creating safe environments for people locked up. So we did a tour of Muncie Prison. There are 2 female prisons in Pennsylvania. One is Muncie, which is the big one, the older one, which is everyone goes through Muncie for classification. Then there's a smaller one, something with a C, I forget what it's called, but Cabrini Hills or something. But nevertheless, we went to Muncie Prison. We want to look at the whole. We want to see how people are being treated, how their mental health is. And I asked a question about trauma survivors and psychotropic medication. Of 1,350 women at Muncie Prison, 1,100 on psychotropic medication. Think about that. I'm thinking they're going to say like 50%, 75%. Of 1,350 women, 1,100 on psychotropic meds. So then I asked about how many were trauma survivors. They said something like 95%. So what happens? We end up punishing people that are survivors of trauma rather than treating them. This is like a public health issue, and it ends up being a criminal justice issue. And again, that's not to say people are not to be held to account for their decisions, but I think we have to understand the space that people are coming from. So, normal trauma responses. Now remember I asked you to think about specific patients, or yourself, or both, or family members. Because we're going to talk about methods that every time you pick up the phone, every encounter you have with a student, with a patient, with a neighbor, you think about the potential. Because this is not us versus them. We're going to talk about how prevalent ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, are. These are normal responses. Fawn is kind of like the new one they're talking about, and that's like identifying with the oppressor or the abuser, like when you really attach yourself to them. Fight, flight, and freeze. Those are the ones we're familiar with, right? Do you see people that you know in there? Okay, now we want to talk to each other. So we want you to talk to the person next to you for a few moments. And I don't know what asks you to be vulnerable. It's as strange as possible. What is your default trauma response? So we say this: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And maybe there are others. I'm sure there are. So when things pop off, as my kids say, what is your default? What are your defaults, or what is your default? We're just going to take about 5-10 minutes. Talk to the person next to you and answer those questions.
What's your default?
And you know why they're she's free. You're free. Yeah. You're free. Yeah. Mark's learned to fight. Oh, she's a fighter. Wait, you want to talk to you? Just sit there.
I think she could
I'm a fight. So you're a fight and you're a fight. I just moved. No, she's a fight. Poor mission. No, she's a fight. Oh, no. At my house, she's a fight. Oh, I believe that. At my house. Oh, fighter.
So that's even a different setting.
Different settings. Sam said I'm a fight. She said I'm a move out and make it a lot bigger,
I only saw the bad
So if we look at all right, so we look at the last couple questions. What we're talking about here is, so when I ask, the initial question is, what is your default response? Once you have a default response, it's probably because it's worked for you over the years. There's a response that has worked for you. And then what happens is, we learn that from somewhere, right? And then what happens is it kind of evolves. It changes and improves, it compensates, I don't know. Or maybe it doesn't, and we find ourselves in settings where that response is kind of maladaptive. So although it was a survival technique while we were at war, or while we were in an abusive family, or while we were in an abusive marriage, now I'm in a healthy relationship, in a healthy marriage, and I'm still using those same relationship skills that I used with my last partner. What are some of the things that came out? Someone want to share?
That you could be different depending on what environment you're in.
Yes, that came up. That depending on the setting.
Mm-hmm.
So at work, you may be an avoider, or at home, you may be a fighter. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. That depends on the situation. Like in certain situations, you might, avoid things, and others you might fight back.
Might fight back.
Also, it's changed over time. Like I started out with flight. Today I'm more into fight. So it has evolved.
That's right. And sometimes you get sick of freezing and running and avoiding, and it's like, we see this with bullies, whether it's workplace bullying or it's schoolhouse bullying. Who's going to protect the bully? We used to do work with, I worked in a juvenile justice setting, and so Pennsylvania, all juvenile justice settings have to use restorative practices. They have to use like this restorative justice approach. I mean, in order for a child to come home, they have to write these victim impact statements and things like that. And so Pennsylvania, you can also be adjudicated. So someone can commit a crime at like 12 years old and stay locked up for like 21. It's kind of weird because they don't do what they're supposed to do. And part of that may be writing a victim impact statement. I was a case manager. Two things were kind of odd. One thing was they used to say Bats is going to let anyone go home. I said, you don't care, you let all these guys out. And I said, they're kids. I said, until I encounter a child that if I go home and he moved next door to me and I felt danger for my daughters, I don't think it deserves to be there. The other thing was, I would work with the kids that it was difficult for them to write victim impact statements. It was hard for them. And what we found out was they would say things like, no one cared about me. So they've committed a crime against someone, and they have to care and acknowledge it, and they'd say, no one cared. When all those things happened to me, nobody cared. No one cared about me. Why should I care about them? So until someone cared about them, until I could show them that we do care about them, or someone does care about them, it was hard to get them to that next level. All right, any questions on this? Anything stick out? How does it need to continue to evolve? What maladaptive behaviors are we carrying from past experiences into current experiences? So we talk about getting beyond the nightmare comment. That nightmare is, what are we still living out that we no longer need? All right, the impact of trauma. We're doing good on time here. This is some of the physiological impacts. My daughter pointed out, I didn't even realize, she was like, there's only 3 men in this room. Yeah, I don't even know what that means, like, a couple more than 3, but maybe men don't need healing and men don't need to know about this stuff, I don't know. That was a joke and a microaggression at the same time, so I apologize. Men definitely need to be in here, right? But these are some of the physiological impacts that we see. So for our healthcare professionals, we see these every day, right?
Are they listed by percentage seen?
No, and this is not an exhaustive list either.
Okay.
This is just, I don't know. Maybe the therapist can say why I chose this order. You know, that's how it's right. Yeah, actually, it looks like it would be, right? Cardiovascular, these are like the top killers, right?
Well, stress, I don't know, I feel like that should be,
Stress may be number 1.
have to be for me, yeah.
Like, this stuff really impacts us. And we're going to talk about like how adverse childhood experiences, things that happen before your 18th birthday, still impact. But people show up. These are the reasons they show up. Yes, ma'am.
I've always felt that the disease process, no matter what it is a grieving process. Because I meet people, last week they were fine and then they had a cardiovascular event where they had a stroke, or now they're 10 years older, or they say this never happened to me before, and whatever the issue, aging, whatever the issue is, it's a loss. Everything is about loss when it comes to your disease process, and I feel that we don't address that in the healthcare field. Hence why I'm so mad.
That's right.
That's why it's not being addressed.
So I used to work at a federally qualified health center, and I came on to work with what they call superutilized partnership. Superutilizers are the 5% of the population that use 65% of the healthcare dollars. So these are folks, I mean, when you look at any system, there's a small percent of the population that's using them, that's using the whole system. So we started to look at how do we help these people decrease their utilization, ER visits and hospital room visits. And we found through trauma-informed care, through narrative medicine, storytelling, through a couple different kind of ways to work. One of the things that always stuck with me is I would do the assessments. I was the first person that the patients would meet. So I'd go in and I'd ask them, tell me about your best friend. Hasshan knows this, right? People would think that was crazy. Why are you asking them that? And what I found is the people that had the most utilization had the few amount of social supports. And they'd say things to me like, I don't have friends, I don't trust people. Now the criteria was 4 more hospitalizations in 6 months, 4 more meds, 3 or more chronic conditions, and the people with the most chronic conditions and the most hospitalizations would say, I don't trust people, I don't have friends. So that's when we say like healing occurs in relationships. We begin to talk about that and to talk about the stories. So when people come to me and they have all these GI issues, I'm talking about the stories, like what is that attached to? And we find that some of that's true what they're saying. Oh, we have an activity for you guys. I need you to bear with me and trust me on this one. So we're going to talk about something called allostatic load. You guys know about allostatic load? Okay, so I need everyone to stand up, if you're able to. You will never forget this. I promise you. This is like about different learning styles. Even when we teach, like if you teach a second grader like this, they'll learn these things for the rest of their lives. Take one shoe off. Just trust me. It's about trust. Unless you have boots up to here, then you have to trust your neighbor. You're gonna love this experience. Nakia Monique, take one shoe off.
I'm not. I have shoes up to here, Dad. I'm not going to take it.
See that?
So I'll watch it.
All right. So the foot that still has the shoe on, lift it up. You see the difficulty balancing? Yes. Okay, put it back down. I want to explain something to you. You'll never forget what allostatic load is. What you're feeling right now, that balance, that's called homeostasis. That's that balance, right? So when you lift that foot back up. That's called allostasis. Your muscles are like contracting and struggling. You can put them down. You can put your shoe back on. But remember that feeling. Remember that feeling. Your muscles are contracting, struggling, because they're trying to get back to homeostasis. That's what they're trying to do. Your muscles are working to get back to homeostasis. And that's called allostatic load. So we're gonna watch the video clip. How are we looking on time? Yeah. That is that constant wear and tear on your body, because there are hormones and things like that in your body when you're dealing with that fight or flight, adrenaline and cortisol levels that we talked about. We talk about children in violent communities or communities full of violence, how they have higher cortisol levels. That constantly breaks their body down. So when we work with superutilized, and we work with certain populations, I would go in and I would say to the physician and to the family, it's more than just the rice. What do we tell them? We say, eat less rice. Eat less rice and everything will get better. I'm going to show you a video that speaks to that. This one's a little long, it's probably like 11 minutes. All right, so exhale, 3 fingers.
Other direction.
I did the same thing before, right? It's habit, see? All right.
Nope, not this one. Next one.
How do I get out of this? Exit screen. So this is Nadine Burke-Harris TED Talk.
Reason number 17, because behind every great business meeting is something more interesting than business. To find out all of it.
Described. So for me,
So the funniest part of when I'm doing this, like with YouTube, is, and again, I have my daughters with me. My daughter's sitting there thinking, oh my God, I hope they don't see what he watches on YouTube. Because you'll see like all this Tupac stuff, and it's like, this guy's supposed to be like an educator, and he's watching, they always laugh. But it didn't show up this time. So I do watch Tupac videos.
in the mid-90s, the CDC and Kaiser Permanente discovered an exposure that dramatically increased the risk for 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in the United States. In high doses, it affects brain development, the immune system, hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. Folks who are exposed in very high doses have triple the lifetime risk of heart disease and lung cancer, and a 20-year difference in life expectancy. And yet doctors today are not trained in routine screening or treatment. Now, the exposure I'm talking about is not a pesticide or pathogen chemical. It's childhood trauma. Okay, what kind of trauma am I talking about here? I'm not talking about failing a test or losing a basketball game. I am talking about threats that are so severe or pervasive that they literally get under our skin and change our physiology. Things like abuse or neglect, or growing up with a parent who struggles with mental illness or substance dependence. Now, for a long time, I viewed these things in the way I was trained to view them. Either as a social problem, refer to social services, or as a mental health problem, refer to mental health services. And then something happened to make me rethink my entire approach. When I finished my residency, I wanted to go someplace where I felt really needed, someplace where I could make a difference. So I came to work for California Pacific Medical Center, one of the best private hospitals in Northern California, and together we opened a clinic in Bayview Hunters Point, one of the poorest, most underserved neighborhoods in San Francisco. Now, prior to that point, there had been only one pediatrician in all of Bayview to serve more than 10,000 children. So we hung a shingle, and we were able to provide top quality care regardless of ability to pay. It was so cool. We targeted the typical health disparities: access to care, immunization rates, asthma hospitalization rates, and we hit all of our numbers. We felt very proud of ourselves. But then I started noticing a disturbing trend. A lot of kids were being referred to me for ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But when I actually did a thorough history and physical, what I found was that for most of my patients, I couldn't make a diagnosis of ADHD.
most of the kids I was seeing had experienced such severe trauma that it felt like something else was going on. Somehow, I was missing something important. Now, before I did my residency, I did a master's degree in public health. And one of the things that they teach you in public health school is that if you're a doctor and you see 100 kids that all drink from the same well, and 98 of them develop diarrhea, you can go ahead and write that prescription for dose after dose after dose of antibiotics, or you can walk over and say, what the hell is in this well? So I began reading everything that I could get my hands on about how exposure to adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. And then one day, my colleague walked into my office and he said, Dr. Burke, have you seen this? In his hand was a copy of a research study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. That day changed my clinical practice and ultimately my career. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is something that everybody needs to know about. It was done by Dr. Vince Felitti at Kaiser and Dr. Bob Onda at the CDC, and together they asked 17,500 adults about their history of exposure to what they called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Those include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, parental mental illness, substance dependence, incarceration, parental separation or divorce, or domestic violence. For every yes, you would get a point on your ACE score. And then what they did was they correlated these ACE scores against health outcomes. What they found was striking. Two things. Number one, ACEs are incredibly common. 67% of the population had at least one ACE, and 12.6%, 1 in 8, had 4 or more ACEs. The second thing that they found was that there was a dose-response relationship between ACEs and health outcomes. The higher your ACE score, the worse your health outcomes. For a person with an ACE score of 4 or more, their relative risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease was 2.5 times that of someone with an ACE score of 0. For hepatitis, it was also 2.5 times. For depression, it was 4.5 times. For suicidality, it was 12 times. A person with an ACE score of 7 or more had triple the lifetime risk of lung cancer and 3.5 times the risk of ischemic heart disease, the #1 killer in the United States of America. Well, of course, this makes sense. You know, some people looked at this data and they said, come on, you know, you have a rough childhood, you're more likely to drink and smoke and do all these things that are going to ruin your health. This isn't science. This is just bad behavior. It turns out this is exactly where the science comes in. We now understand, better than we ever have before, how exposure to early adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. It affects areas like the nucleus accumbens, the pleasure and reward center of the brain that is implicated in substance dependence. It inhibits the prefrontal cortex, which is necessary for impulse control and executive function, a critical area for learning. And on MRI scans, we see measurable differences in the amygdala, the brain's fear response center. So there are real neurologic reasons why folks exposed to high doses of adversity are more likely to engage in high-risk behavior. And that's important to know. But it turns out that even if you don't engage in any high-risk behavior, you're still more likely to develop heart disease or cancer. The reason for this has to do with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. the brain's and body's stress response system that governs our fight or flight response. How does it work? Well, imagine you're walking in the forest and you see a bear. Immediately, your hypothalamus sends a signal to your pituitary, which sends a signal to your adrenal gland that says, release stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. And so your heart starts to pound, your pupils dilate, your airways open up, and you are ready to either fight that bear or run from the bear. And that is wonderful if you're in a forest and there's a bear. But the problem is what happens when the bear comes home every night. And this system is activated over and over and over again. And it goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health-damaging. Children are especially sensitive to this repeated stress activation because their brains and bodies are just developing. High doses of adversity not only affect brain structure and function, they affect the developing immune system, developing hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. So for me, this information threw my old training out the window, because when we understand the mechanism of a disease, when we know not only which pathways are disrupted, but how, then as doctors, it is our job to use this science for prevention and treatment. That's what we do. So in San Francisco, we created the Center for Youth Wellness to prevent, screen, and heal the impacts of ACEs and toxic stress. We started simply with routine screening of every one of our kids at their regular physical, because I know that if my patient has an ACE score of 4, she's 2.5 times as likely to develop hepatitis or COPD. She's 4.5 times as likely to become depressed, and she's 12 times as likely to attempt to take her own life as my patient with 0 ACEs. I know that when she's in my exam room. For our patients who do screen positive, we have a multidisciplinary treatment team that works to reduce the dose of adversity and treat symptoms using best practices, including home visits, care coordination, mental health care, nutrition, holistic.
She's going to talk about all the things we do not have. That's deep, right? So what happens if the bear lives at home? Every night you go home to that. They used to talk about the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences study, and they said if we could prevent and treat adverse childhood experiences, childhood trauma, we would do away with the DSM, I think it was 4 at the time, so just the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. They said we would do away with it, it would become a pamphlet. And it was like this big, it's like this big. Now what they're saying is if we can prevent and treat adverse childhood experiences, we would eradicate the top 5 killers. Because now the research is showing the physical impact that it has. So it's not only, we used to say, oh, people engage in high-risk behavior, substance abuse, drinking and driving. Now they're saying people are literally dying. This is contributing to diabetes. This is contributing to congestive heart failure. Like the research is showing that. Through allostatic load. Some of our students right there, right? Some of us. That's how we go to work every day. And I don't mean a big person, a big backpack. We're carrying all of this with us every day. And we're expected to smile. So all of this is depressing. But it's not all doom and gloom. We're going to talk about, there's this concept called like positive deviance. Like, how do people survive? How are people still walking? So once we know that people are more predisposed to lose 20 plus years of their lives, what are the protective factors that we can put in place to prevent that? Any questions on the video, on where we're at now? This is simple blocking and tackling, that's where we're at. So, neurological impact. I told you guys, none of this stuff is going to be new. You know this. You've been doing this for years. But there's like some language and some research to support it now. Behavioral implications. We've known these for some time. What jumps out off that page?
Overachievement.
Overachievement. People are surprised to see that, but if you think about it, it's a coping skill. Some of us are in here because we're survivors and we're overachievers. Our brother's not here, our cousin's not here, our sister's not here because they fell into different boxes. Some of our patients come and they've lived perfect lives, but their bodies have just been breaking down. We don't know why. I heard someone say promiscuity is a form of self-mutilation. Anything else? All right. Social implication. These we know. Incarceration, homelessness, divorce, and they're cyclical. So when we fill out our ACEs, we're going to see divorce has the same rate as some other ones. And we know this is one of the number one indicators to obesity. And we know obesity contributes to health outcomes. And we live in a society where divorce is prevalent. So again, we're not talking about people not being accountable and responsible for their decisions. We're talking about what predispositions exist. All right, so let's take a moment and complete the ACE survey. I think it should be in the back of the last page. And we're not going to ask you to share it. This is for you. And again, so it's going to feel depressing up to this point, but we're going to talk about resiliency also. So this survey is going to ask some really personal questions. It may pull some scabs off. We're available. There are therapists in the room. I'm available. There's a lot of support. If this brings up anything, please stay after. Let's talk. It's a 10-point questionnaire. This is what she referred to. And why you guys are taking the survey, I'll just give you a little background on it. I don't think Dr. Burke touched on this. So this was done by Kaiser Permanente and CDC in San Diego. She talked about that. But one of the interesting things about this survey is, so when we're in school and we read these articles and talk about all this research that was done, when you really look into it, this is like 500 or 5,000 people that were a part of this research. But when you look at the adverse childhood experiences survey, this was over 17,000 people, and it's still being done today. So there's a lot of people that have contributed to this research. And it started with an obesity study. She talked about it, right? It started with an obesity study. People were losing significant amounts of weight in like a year. They lose like 200 pounds. They were part of this study. So you had these folks that lose 200 pounds, and then what they found was within 6 months, some people were gaining the weight back. And they couldn't figure out, how could someone lose 200 pounds and they gain the weight back in 6 months? And the psychologists started to ask questions and talk to the participants, and one lady gave them the breakthrough. She said, someone flirted with me in the grocery store. Someone flirted with her in the grocery store, so she regained the 200 pounds that she lost. And that's when they began to realize the weight was a protective factor for her. And it began to uncover some of the childhood trauma. And it kind of changed the outcome of the whole study. Then they started to measure the childhood trauma. So, average childhood experiences, these are things that happen before our 18th birthday. And this is what she was referring to, 4 or more. And this is not to scare you. This is about education for us, our family, our community, our patients, our students. 4 or more ACEs takes 20 plus years off our lives. 20 plus years of our lives. So now we got to talk about, well, what do we do? So I tell my story, I tell people, I was left back in kindergarten. I'm the only person I've ever met that's been left back in kindergarten. What do you have to do to be left back in kindergarten? Were you left back in kindergarten? See, we have a connection. This is a true story. Left back in kindergarten. Left back in 7th grade. I spent 3 years in the 9th grade. I was probably like 19 when we met at Jim Thorpe. 3 years in the 9th grade. Dropped out, got a GED. I have an ACE score of a 9, so I usually have the highest in the room. The issue is, what was it like to be my teacher? You know? So we're talking about, in kindergarten, no one asked what was I going through in kindergarten, what was I going through in 7th grade. Now, I share that to share, I'm still standing, I'm still here, I'm cool. But it's because we have to implement those protective factors. We have to find community, there's some work that we have to do. We have to support our patients and our students, and we have to ask the difficult questions. So, every time we walk into a room, we bring some baggage with us. We bring, what are our issues? And we have to realize that as we interact with people else, it'll impact them. So I want you guys to take your ACE, just so that you can see the score, you can know the score. Like I said, that's for you. I believe we should use it as a universal screening with all our patients. Anywhere that I've worked, that's what we've implemented. And we do have the staff do it also. Usually we'll project it up on the screen so we see who's in the room. We'd have someone not look at our individual scores, but collectively. And you'd be surprised in the healing profession how high our scores are. I think that's why I don't work for Nabisco. It's because I'm a wounded here. Questions about this slide? This is kind of, she talked about this. Oh, some trauma screening tools. We'll kind of just run through these. We're doing good on time. So the ACE is the average child experience is one. There are a couple other ones there. You guys have this material. This is not them versus us. These are not the others. 67% of the population have adverse child experiences. And this was at the Kaiser Permanente study. Through the one they did. What do we know? What can you guess about a study that was done by Kaiser Permanente in San Diego, California? So one thing is everyone had health insurance, which I think says something. The majority of the people that were in this study, the 17,000 people we're talking about, were college educated. The majority of them were Caucasian, middle class, excuse me. So when they do this in urban contexts or in impoverished communities, you see much higher scores. So even when they're talking about the ACE study, that was done in a somewhat protected community. These are some of the stats she talked about. Anything surprise you that she said in the video? 12 times more likely to commit suicide, I think she says. This one says 15 times more likely. You'll see some differences in numbers. 4 more ACEs. 15 times more likely to commit suicide. Do we ask our patients or our students any of these questions? You say you do? You want to say a little more about it?
Well, in some of our programs, we ask a lot of these questions because they're built into the curriculum. I have some doctors that I'm working with that work in our clinics at St. Luke's, and they're starting to ask, they're doing the ACEs, and then they're also doing the resiliency questionnaire to go with it. Because, I mean, we really need to start thinking more holistically about people's health, and if we're not screening, we're not knowing, and we're not treating them appropriately.
That's right. Do you see the difference? Yes.
I think for the providers that are using it, I think they're doing a better job because I think they're addressing the issues and we're getting them connected to more services and talking about it.
So am I saying everyone or just anyone should be administering it? I mean, that's up to the organization, but just being aware. When I worked at Neighborhood Health, local federally qualified health center, I had a patient that I was working with. So everyone took a PHQ-2. This is like a depression screening, where they ask 2 questions. And those 2 questions will trigger to like 9 questions centered around depression. And based on the results of the 9 questions, you get to see a therapist. So I saw this guy, and we would all say he was very successful. He was involved in his community, he was an attorney, great guy, all around great guy, but he had severe depression. And when we met, he said no one has ever used the word depression with him before, or even told him that he had depression. So we talked about what depression looked like, and he could draw back, he could talk about times he went to the school counselor, or throughout his whole life. He's had this his whole life, and no one ever said to me he had depression. Now, I'm a phenomenal therapist, but I wouldn't attribute it to me, I would attribute it to him. He had maybe 4 sessions, and this guy did so much work and dug deep, and he said if anyone would have just told me this is what I needed to do, I would have done it. He learned everything he could learn about depression, and he didn't need to come anyone. When we checked in with him, everything was going great in life because he was doing some work just because we did the universal screening. So that was the purpose of the story. Just the universal screenings do work because we're able to offer education. Some people just need the education. They just need to know you have an ACE score of 6. This is what it means. There are some supports that you can use and don't take advantage of. Other people need higher levels of support. But we need to start to have these conversations. We need to start to have those conversations. Resilience. Now that's when we'll start talking about the good stuff. So how do we get all these things despite the experiences people have? How do we still have a happy and fulfilled, healthy life where you can live to be 84 years old and go to Hawaii and all of those things that my grandmother does? Aruba, excuse me, I don't get to go. Right? How do we support resilience in the people to assist them in succeeding despite the obstacles that they experience? What do you guys think? You do this work every day. So positive deviance looks at the success stories. Rather than look at the challenging stories, we look at how does someone come from a home or a community like this and still be successful? And let's do more of that. What's the secret sauce? Let's do more of that. Let's incorporate more of that into our work. What works? Yes, ma'am.
We share small little successes. Like, we go for a goal, and it's a small goal, and then we celebrate it afterwards.
It's contagious.
We do it repeatedly.
It's beautiful. Small little successes. What else? What's worked? What's worked for you guys?
Building the community, getting some friends, but kind of teaching them about how to choose friends and the kind of qualities to look for in friends.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people out here living life in isolation, making decisions in isolation, a lot of secrecy. Dr. Joy DeGruy, who she talks about our pathology is our denial. Like, we don't want to acknowledge our experiences, and that's kind of like where the pathology comes from. Anything else come to you guys? All right, trauma treatment. We'll talk about a couple of treatment models. Most of these you'll be familiar with. Cognitive behavioral therapy. Therapists knew that was going to come up. That's the answer to everything. That's the silver bullet. Cognitive behavioral therapy. And that is about change your thinking, change your mind. That's the big one. It's kind of like, how are you perceiving things? Your thoughts impact your emotions, which impact your behavior. So really doing some cognitive restructuring with patients or students or community members or family members or for ourselves. Does anyone in here do EMDR? Are familiar with it? Can you share a little bit about it? Because I'm not a good, I don't explain it very well.
I'm not a practitioner, but I've had it done. I've been a patient.
Okay.
And I read a lot about it, and it's one of those things that I'd heard so many people had great experiences, and some of the books and everything were so powerful that I was kind of not wowed by what happened with me, but it might have just been, I didn't give it enough chance, or whatever.
It's different, right?
Yeah.
It's different. So it has to do with rapid eye movement and following the finger and tapping. It taps into a certain part of the brain where trauma has occurred, but the outcomes are great. So I've seen people do it in certain settings, like we use it in one juvenile justice setting, but touching people's involved. So I thought that was kind of odd, like they would touch the kids. But that's one that works. This is the one that we know the most about, psychopharmacology. How do you say it? Oh, pharmacotherapy. Give people medication. Treat the symptoms. That's what we do. We treat the symptoms. this is the one you guys keep hearing me say. Healing encouraging relationships within the context of community. Then there are also, we talk about some of the indigenous healing models. So I just put one up there that really talks about, again, that harmony, that balance. They talk about getting back on the red road. And these are so different than the way that we treat people in our society. All right, trauma-informed care, what is that? What do you guys think of when you hear trauma-informed care? This is like a buzzword nowadays. What comes to mind?
I have to hear their story.
You have to hear their stories. I don't even know what video that is, and it's just disgusting. Yeah, I guess that's what it is. Right? I don't know. He doesn't even know what video that is. Right? So this is an organizational commitment. So you can have a trauma-sensitive therapist or trauma-sensitive teacher within a school system. You can have someone that's trauma-responsive. But when we talk about trauma-informed care, that means a whole Moravian college has a practice that every interaction, that means from the receptionist to the janitor to the president. Of course, there's a continuum. That means there are trauma-informed supervision practices, like these anti-oppressive supervision practices, so you're treated with respect at every level. That means every phone call. So when I work with organizations, that's what we talk about. Every time the receptionist picks up the phone, they understand that 67% of the population, and in some communities higher, are trauma survivors. So one patient shared an experience of why she loved the facility so much, and she said, when it rains, she was injured. When it rained, she was injured during the rain. So she would miss appointments. And rather than call her and just drop her from the caseload, or call and start to fuss at her, why didn't you make it to your appointment? Someone just asked, what's going on? And she was able to share that. So now when it rains, the receptionist calls and says, we know it's raining out, we know it's icy out, think you'll be able to make it, so they can book someone else. And she says, no, I don't think I can make it today. That's trauma-informed. You know, when the student comes in and they're irritable, it's understanding they may have not eaten breakfast this morning, or things may be going on at home. Same thing with staff. It's using restorative practices. When someone's missing work or not showing up at their best, how do we treat people when they're not at their best? And again, we're not talking about people not being accountable. There's a level of accountability that people have to have, but we just do it with compassion. We address things with compassion. So there's a continuum. It takes a long time for organizations to get all the way. All right, what are some of the hallmarks of trauma-informed care? These are the things we want to build to be a trauma-informed organization or trauma-informed unit, because you can have even within just your unit. There's some things you have control of. Even within your classroom, you can create a trauma-informed classroom or trauma-informed team. So even when we say an organization, on a large scale, it's, you know, so you mentioned St. Luke's is doing some things, it's taking time to roll out. So it may be start from community health and then go to certain teams, with the goal being the 5-year plan, the whole organization, the whole LVH, the whole St. Luke's. All of the school systems are working around trauma-informed care at different levels. Trust. How do we establish trust? And really being intentional, we have to start asking ourselves, when and where have we violated people's trust? And we have to acknowledge that. He doesn't look like he's going to catch it, right? That's right, look, perception. Someone said he's stepping back. All right, so next activity. We need one person to choose to stand on the desk and the other person to catch them. Who's really going to do that? Trust, it takes trust, healing takes trust, all right? Safety. So do our organizations have all of these? Do our families even have all these things, man? Like they talk about the strength-based thing, and they say in the ideal strength-based world, when your child comes home with a report card, so I have a son, Justice, this guy, man, like his report card's terrible, you know? So I'm supposed to look at his report card, and I'm not supposed to look at the F's and the D's. I'm supposed to say, oh, buddy, you got an A in gym. Good job. Good job. That's the strength. It's hard. You're supposed to start there, you know? Got an A in gym. See, the way I approach is not strength-based. That's what no, but seriously, but that's where we started. What are people's strengths? What are the assets that people bring? And it takes work. So, you know, like I said, our workplaces don't exhume it. Some of our families really don't, because that's not what we're taught in our culture and our society. You know? I get in trouble because I left the toilet seat up, but I turned off the lights. So you just say, good job turning all the lights off tonight. You know? So think about again, specific patients, specific families, specific students. How are we establishing trust? How are we intentionally working to establish trust? Have we created safety? And we don't define that. We don't define safety. Other people define safety. Collaboration. Are we really working together to provide the best care or the best education? And I know this takes a lot of work and we don't have time. We have 30 students in a classroom. We have 15 minutes, 20 minutes before a patient. So are we working together as a team? Do we have an interdisciplinary team? Choice. Are we giving patients choice? We're going to talk about language shortly. That's one of the things. We talk about people being, what's that word we use? Non-compliant. It's like, have we given them choices? Empowerment. That's me. You can't even see it, though. On top of me, it's the top of the mouth. Are we empowering folks? And strength-based. This stuff is not easy, but these are the hallmarks of trauma-informed care. This is the foundation of it. All right. So for all the folks that need practical tools, you said after 2 hours of this guy talking, we showed a couple videos. What did I take home that I can use today? If you don't remember anything else we covered, these are the 3 things I want you to remember. Language. The way we talk about other people dictates how we treat them. I have a friend that's an educator by training, I guess you'd say. She left teaching because she said the way the teachers talked about the students in the teacher's lounge. That's why she left. You say you believe it?
I have an intern that won't go into the teacher's lounge.
An intern that won't go into the teacher's lounge because of that. And this is not to pick on teachers, but she left teaching, think about that, because the way the teachers talk about the students in the teacher's lounge. And she went to multiple schools, and she could not find somewhere where she felt, not in this area, of course. Or the same thing we talk about with patients. When you read the files, the things that we say about people. I used to work, like one of the oddest things about me, I think people found, was that I wouldn't read files. I mean, and I was a social worker, so I didn't necessarily need to know some of the stuff. I didn't think I did, but I want to meet the person. I don't want to read what someone else said about them. Yeah. He said that's what you do. And it makes a huge difference.
Can influence or impact how you might treat them.
That's right, because it can influence it. Yeah. So that's the first thing, language, being mindful of how we speak about people. And also, more importantly, we're going to talk about how we speak about ourselves. That's crazy when we think about the way we talk to ourselves. We're going to get to that. But language. This goes into a little deeper. Same thing, same concept, language. So we use this language of defects, deficits, deficiencies, and like disabilities when we talk about folks, rather than like a strength-based approach. One of my mentors, Dr. Jones, taught me, he said, diagnosis dictates the treatment. He always told me that. He said, once we can diagnose you, so if we say he's stupid, we know how to treat stupid people. If we say he's a criminal, we know how to treat criminal people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know? If we say, give someone a diagnosis of schizophrenia, we know exactly what to do. We know what therapy, we know what medication. The diagnosis kind of dictates the treatment. So we got to be careful with diagnosing and labeling people. Negatives is what we're talking about. All right, here's an exercise for you. How much time do we have? I am. This is going to be the most difficult exercise of the day. This is about language. So I want you to do something that you've been taught not to do. We want to say, I am, and then after that, only say positive things about ourselves. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. One word. Just keep going down the list. Keep saying naming words. And this is a great exercise to do with your partner. Is to just look at each other and say, you are. And as tempted as you are to say a pain in the butt, don't say it. Just focus on your strengths. So I ask you to, again, trust me, because I have the clicker, so that means I'm trustworthy. And find the partner next to you and just say, I am, and just name some of the positive things about yourself, and then vice versa. No timing.
You are, but all I'm hungry.
Because when I registered this program with the district, I registered it. My nose like.
So, who really did it? You guys really did it? So which This didn't feel like Let's still going.
Okay, sure. So then you submit those. You know what it is?
All right, I have a question.
This is the one I'm going to
So Carter, stand up, Carter. Carter, tell us 3 phenomenal things about you. It's hard.
Helpful.
Huh?
Helpful.
You're helpful?
Caring.
Caring.
Trustworthy.
Trustworthy. Carter's helpful, caring, trustworthy. Is that correct? Okay, I see some nods. Shayla's not nodding.
Yes.
Carolyn, 3 wonderful, phenomenal things about yourself.
You know this is hard for me to do. I'm definitely helpful, I am definitely trustworthy, and I'm very hardworking.
Okay. It's hard. We're not taught to do it. It does something positive to our brains. That's what they say. The smart people say that. You know? This is something we have to exercise. There's this video with this little girl. I couldn't find it. Somebody know what I'm talking about? Little girls in the mirror. What's her name?
I don't know, she's so cute.
Yeah, tell us what she's doing.
Well, her and her dad, they're standing in the bathroom, and he would say something like, "What do you think about yourself?" And she would be like, "I'm pretty, I'm smart, I'm good at school." And she would say all these things to herself that would be so empowering for somebody who's like 1 or 2 years old. And I thought that was really amazing.
Thank you. It's beautiful. She's like so tiny. She's on the sink, and she's just affirming herself. And we're taught not to do that. Like, we're taught. Then I came home the other day, but I said I scored 50 points. I told her, we never said, I scored 50 points. I had a triple-double. I don't play sports. I mean, I'm 5'6", but just, I used to. It's like, in the work that we do, when do we get to spike the ball, though, in the work that we do? You know, like, we cared for people all day. You know, we still got up in the morning and we did that good work and we were kind and like, so spike the ball every once in a while. It does something to your brain. I scored 50 points. All right, so that's back to language. The way we speak to ourselves, this is critical. This is critical. And remember, so we're talking about the impact of trauma, but we're also talking about vicarious and secondary trauma and how burnout and compassion fatigue is. These are the things that beat us down every day that we don't have the time to celebrate. All right, universal precautions. Tell us what universal precautions are.
Gloves.
Huh? Gloves. Who said gloves? Gloves. So if I started to bleed right now, everybody would jump. You guys have gloves in your back pocket. because it's ingrained in us. It's what they call it, automaticity or something like that. That's what we're talking about. Gloves. Everybody knows when I say universal precautions, it means gloves. So when it comes to trauma-informed care, we're talking about something different. We're talking about knowing that this is not them versus us, how prevalent adverse childhood experiences are. So every time you pick up the phone, every time you walk in the room, understanding that we're dealing with trauma survivors, and how do we interact with people from that space? So that we don't re-traumatize, and that's the key. When we're interacting with those students, we don't want to re-traumatize them. You know? Remember I told you, I was left back in 7th grade. Well, some really rough things happened in 7th grade, but no one ever asked. You know, they just said, get rid of this guy. You know? So we want to be mindful of that. All right. And also understanding normal reactions to abnormal experiences. So when Tommy throws a chair, or when that patient cusses you out, it's possible, now I'm not saying it's okay, because we believe in accountability, but it's possible that it's a normal reaction to abnormal experiences. We don't know what happened that morning with Tommy. He didn't just walk into math class and throw that chair out. Algebra's not that hard, it's hard. But it's not about algebra. So one of the tools that we want to leave you with is, it's not about you. How do we ask you to engage, to lean in and engage and have these relationships with people, and then ask you to understand that it's not about you. Now, the key to that is, unless of course it is about you. Because sometimes it is. Sometimes we've done something that, you know, since we're the professional, we can't admit to. Sometimes we make mistakes. I put the wrong time in my calendar and I didn't show up for the appointment. And the family's pissed, you know? So, normal reaction to abnormal experiences. Any questions, guys? All right, we gotta move right along, right? Okay, how do we help build capacity in individuals, families, and communities we serve? What are some other techniques? And this is not an exhaustive list, it's just some things that came to mind. We've talked about some of these already. What's missing? How many swimmers do we have? Not too many. Okay. That's odd. Swimmers. Swimmer, I mean, like so they're different levels. People don't know how to answer that question, right? So I know I'm not a swimmer. I'm the guy in the pool holding on to the edge of the pool. Like, this is dead serious. So if I fall in the pool, I'm drowning, right? I don't have the capacity to drown. I don't have the capacity to save myself. Then there's some people, if they're out on a lake in a boat and they fall in, they're drowning. But others can swim the shore, you know? A lake, anyone can survive in the middle of a lake, Beltsville Lake. If you fall in the middle, you're gonna make it to shore. So no problem, right? I'm done. Because I don't have the capacity, right? Then there are others, if you're out in the middle of an ocean, on a big boat or a ship or whatever, and you fall in. Who can survive there? Who can like tread water for days? Not days, some people can last a long time, so the Coast Guard shows up. Yeah, see, you got that, right? But then if like there's a shark coming or there's like this huge wave coming, like, at some point, right? But so that conversation is about capacity. Some people's capacity, they don't have anything left in the tank that if they just fall, if I slip and fall in the pool, it's over. Like, I don't have the energy to get out of it. And that's kind of how it works. Like, how do we give people, like, this guy has the weight of the world on him, literally. Like, how do we support people in building capacity to get out of that pool, at least? Anything come to mind? All right, how do we support you guys? How do we support you guys to continue to go out there and do your work? Who knows about the triple aim? I knew you know about it. The triple aim. So this is what healthcare uses. That's these three. Lowering costs. So we know, like, we're trying to bend that healthcare cost because it's so expensive. And the way that they found that they're going to bend the healthcare cost is these three things right here. Improving care, lowering costs, and having more satisfied patients. It's a little deeper and more complicated than that, but essentially that's what they're going to do. So an article was written that talks about the quadruple aim, and what they found is that more satisfied providers is what improves everything. So what we've been working on in the teams that I work with healthcare, education, community-based teams, is that if we improve the working conditions of the providers, that they in turn, I guess you'd say, treat the patients better, which in turn lowers cost and provides better care. So I came onto this team to do some work, this healthcare team. They had a 75% turnover. And we promised them, I said, I can decrease turnover to 0. They said it's impossible. In this field, turnover is going to be high. We were able to decrease turnover to 0 just by implementing some basic things. But it was all centered around improving the experience of the providers. We're not even talking about expensive things. We're talking about just implementing what they call team care and compassion. All right, so we're going to talk about self-care first. How are we doing on time? Everybody knows this picture, right? What this means. Take care of yourself first. Look how the little girl's looking at her dad. she doesn't understand, right? But before you put her oxygen mask on, put your oxygen mask on first. So we have to commit to taking care of ourselves first. And the compassion part. So this idea of self-compassion. So most of you guys just met me, right? If I tell you this story, I went out to dinner last night, met this wonderful young lady online, eHarmony, because that's where half of all marriages are started by eHarmony. We all know that tagline. So we go out. After this expensive dinner, it's like mid-dinner, she finished her steak and her lobster. She looks over, she says, you know, we're just gonna have to end here. You're not really that good looking. Kind of boring. Smell a little bit. Not that nice a guy. Like, she's just going in on me. And it's like listen, look at your faces. You guys just met me, but you care. You're like, oh my gosh, she should have never spoken to you like that. And what if I told you I want to go on another date with her? And you say, that's crazy. If she walked in here right now, you'd throw tomatoes at her. You know? Right? Throw a chair at her. Right? But here's the issue. Think about how we talk to ourselves. Think about the things we say to ourselves. You're not good enough. You're too fat. You can't do it. You're a failure. Remember that language? The way we talk about people dictates how we treat them. So when we talk about self-care and compassion, this is how we heal. This is how we prevent burnout. This is how we prevent compassion fatigue. Self-care and compassion. We gotta be easy on ourselves. Compassion is understanding that you have 3 kids. You're in school. You're working full time. Maybe you missed yoga. That doesn't make you a failure. I haven't been to the gym in like 6 days. But I have compassion for myself, you know? All right. How will we continue to do it every day if we don't take time for ourselves? So, we have this idea of wellness. We want you to be strong, we want you to be wise, and we want you to be safe. All right, I gotta move along. This is the meat of it. This is what you came for. We need everyone to make a 30-day commitment, and we need you to write it down. 30-day commitment. What are you gonna do? Not every day. What are you gonna commit to for you? I'm writing you a prescription to be selfish. For self-care. What are you gonna do for you? Because if you don't have it, if you don't do it for you, I can assure you, it may not be today, eventually, you'll run out of gas. You're taking care of the kids, you're taking care of your partners. We're in this new generation where we're taking care of our moms and our dads, Aunt Sue. You're watching the news, you're seeing what's going on in North Korea. That stuff is hard. What are you gonna do for you? 30-day promise. Who can commit to that? Okay, we got 3 people, that's a start. All right, we got 6 people. Who can commit to that? Wow, why am I bringing that up? Oh, we're running out of time. All right, now move forward. Team care and compassion. That's back to the Ubuntu principle. I am because we are, therefore because we are, I am. So, this is what we've identified as the quadruple threat. These are the things that make you lose staff. These are the things that make you quit. Some we have control over, some we do not. Compassion fatigue. That's when you get sick of caring, sick and tired of caring. You got the family housing, you got the transportation, you got them hooked up with a provider, you got the food stamps, and then they come in and tell you, mom let dad back in and they got kicked out of the housing and everything, and it just breaks you. You just give up. You got them set up for dialysis, you got them physical therapy, you got him a great provider, and then he comes and you find out what happened. Yeah, he got double prescription of opiates and everything just crumbled. That's what that compassion fatigue, that stuff gets hard. How do we protect ourselves? Caring can take its toll. All right, any questions on that? We talked about that one already, right? Q&A. Now, if you don't ask any questions, that means I covered everything perfectly. That one's for Jim Thorpe, right? That's what they produced. Okay, next steps. What are our feedback loops? So how do we incorporate it into our self-reflective practices? How do you know when you're doing a good job? Let me ask that. How do we know? How do we know when we've done a good job?
I think the feedback.
Feedback?
Yeah. Recognition. Self-satisfaction.
Self-satisfaction?
Your peers come around and say, hey, you're one of us.
You're one of us, thank you. That's that sense of belonging, right? Sure. You're one of us. Feedback from others. Someone was explaining to me the other day, they said part of the job of the other is to see us. Like we can't see ourselves, so part of the job is the other is to see us. Now that can be to tell us you got toothpaste on your face. You know, there's a booger right there. Or that could be to tell you good job. You know, we need that. And then we don't get enough of attaboys, attagirls, right? How else do we know when we've done a good job?
I guess you could also sit there and look a bit at the consequences. You know, we step back and just have a look at how do the consequences of what I have initiated or done show up.
That's right. That's right. What's the outcome look like? So all the kids are off and in college or military or working or just out the house, right? Do we get to breathe? Do we pat ourselves on the back? All right, we did the commitment. That's it. So you guys have some resources there? This feels kind of anticlimactic, I don't know. Any questions? We save some time.
I have a question. So with the historical trauma perspective, has there been any studies to find out, like, with therapy and counseling, like when that generation will stop experiencing that historical trauma? And do you think that plays into some of the current events that are happening in the world for today?
I'm following you. So has there been any research to show when the historical trauma will stop? Like, is this like indefinite because of historical
Yeah,
events?
like if you're able to identify that, you know, you're experiencing this because you're a third generation Holocaust
That's right.
experience or whatnot, are you able to then stop that cycle?
So we talked a little bit about, they have this research that shows, if we look at an individual trauma like sexual abuse, two people have had the same experience, there are like key indicators on like protective factors, what's going to happen. Just having a witness. So we talk about somebody, just having someone present to, and I don't mean present there then, but at some point in your life to acknowledge it makes a difference. When we talk about historical trauma, you'll see things like South Africa has the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where as the leadership changed, rather than the leadership turn around and say, this is what you did during apartheid. It wasn't like kind of like Mugabe's response, we're going to kick you out, we're going to do this to you. They said, no, we want to talk about what happened. We want to create this Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So does that change like the epigenetical stuff? No, but these are risk and protective factors. As you increase the protective factors, it improves people's chances of everything being okay. So when we say a ACE of 4 or more takes 20 plus years of your life, those are untreated ACEs. So when we talk about historical trauma, these are things like Dr. Joy DeGruy, she said, part of America's pathology is their denial. It took until President Clinton even acknowledged that some of these things happened. So I think the research will show part of it is just the acknowledgement, and then people are able to move forward. So we look at in our community, we have a large Dominican population in Allentown. We don't even talk about Trujillo and the experiences that have happened there, or even the Haitian population and things that are going on. We don't even talk about it. And it's not about belaboring it, but it's just that the acknowledgement of, wow, you came through some difficult times. We have a refugee population. We have to say you came through some difficult times. Now, how do we move forward? How do we support that? So there are lots of resources on the back of the paper for you guys. Because some people like I'm telling you, some people like objectives and they like resources. Somebody in this room is going to go home and read every article that's on here. They're there. Any other questions? I think we have a class at 6 o'clock today.
We should be out by 6 for the class, I think it's at 6:30.
Oh, okay. Thank you, guys.